Pause for a moment, take a breath, feel awe and appreciation for being alive. You're here, present, listening. Welcome to the audio version of Awe Digital Wellness Podcast, where we explore mental health, happiness, and the beautiful, messy, complicated relationship we have with ourselves, other humans, and with technology. Make sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app and on our social medias, and more importantly, to visit and reach out to us on our website at awe.digitalwellness.com. Each week, we'll dive into the science, the stories, and the practical strategies that help us thrive, both online and off, because well-being isn't about disconnecting from technology, it's about creating real connections and communicate with communities with open discussions. Even the difficult topics, we will get to it. Let's dive into this week's episode.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the AWE Digital Wellness Podcast. I'm Mark Ritter, joined as always by my co-host Christian Dominique and a special guest today, Dr. Sami Bahig. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen.
Hello.
So Sami has been trained in addiction science, Université de Sherbrooke. I apologize for my mispronunciation. Sami approaches care as a complex adaptive system focusing on workflows, decision architectures, cognitive load, and ethical AI integration across mental health, primary care, and beyond. It's going to be especially interesting conversation because Sami offers both a clinical perspective and a perspective of integrating AI into these systems. So it's a pleasure, Sami. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Nice to have you on the podcast. And for the audience, Sami is joining us from Montreal, Canada. He's a medical doctor, but found that there's also things that we can do beyond medicine with technology now. And Montreal is one of the hottest places in the world for AI. So we'll talk about this. Sami studied at the Mila Institute, and the chair of the Mila Institute is the #1 AI researcher in the world, which I've met, Joshua Benjuo. And we want to see, what the best of medicine and clinical care and AI machine learner can do. And let's talk about this for our viewers. If you're joining us live, make sure that you keep your questions. You can ask Sami and us anything during the show, and we'll have some specific question and answer periods as well. So welcome again. Bonjour, Sami.
Bonjour. I can speak in French also, no problem. So if you want me to answer in French, I can answer in English also, no problem.
Well, I think the problem with French is that I would just sit there.
Viewers that have questions in French. Great.
Sami, you describe yourself as a data alchemist and scientist. What does that mean to you? And when did you realize that medicine alone wasn't enough to solve the problems that you were seeing in healthcare?
Okay, alchemy is like, it can sound a little bit poetic, but it's more the process of the alchemy. I think everybody knows the book of Paulo Coelho, The Alchemist. One of the main ideas of his book is it's not the destination that is important, it's the rigorous process of transformation. Well, alchemists in the medieval times, they were, I would not say scientifics, but they always try to transform raw materials into something a little bit more precious, like gold or something like that. So this is the kind of idea that I'm trying in a very rigorous way, to have some insight from raw data. But in fact, I would say that with clinical data, it's the contrary. It's not the clinical data are the precious, are the gold, and we try to with a rigorous way, we try to extract some insight that could be useful.
Yeah, we talked about addiction medicine. You transitioned from clinical pharmacology, oncology into the AI world, right? AI research. We talked about Mila. What did that shift demand on you? In terms of mind shift, transformation, intellectual challenge, and personal transformation.
I mean, this is two different ways of thinking. Clinical frustration was a trigger. I mean, you when you're a patient with one patient at the time, while when you work with data, you can have impact on thousands of people. When you see people, it's always the same preventable errors. There is no way to act at scale. So data science, from an intellectual perspective, offer you this possibility to act at scale. And I felt like a bit of urgency to do it. But the other intellectual shift is that in medicine also, you need to be confident. You need to be confident. You need to show confidence. You need to show confidence with the patient, with your colleagues, and you always have to be like certain. While in data science, you always show the first thing you show in your projects is the confidence interval. You have you always have to deal with uncertainty. In fact, in medicine also we deal with uncertainty, but I prefer the way we deal it in data science. This is two norms, both legitimate, but I like the way we deal with uncertainty in data science. Yeah, not always.
I think that maybe the uncertainty in data science is more transparent, right? We talk about it. Maybe in the medical, it's more like, we know in our head that the diagnosis is at maybe even 67%, but we tell the patient with confidence that this is it.
Yes, you have to show confidence all the time with patients, with colleagues. Uncertainty is much more transparent in data science. You have a good point. Yes. It's a constant decision. I mean, I think I might have much more impact as a data science at scale than seeing one patient.
I think that's a valid point, and that's why one of the reasons why we created, our AIs at A as well, right? Lumi and Medi are scalable at scales to thousands and millions of people, because we realized as well, in the mental health, and we'll talk about mental health later, that, one person, either a clinician, a therapist, or a coach, can spend 1 hour or even 5 hours per week with a patient or a client. And the rest of the week, what are they going to do? So to scale it, to reach more people, to have more accessibility, and also to have more consistency throughout the days, the weeks, the months, or post-treatment, AI can be a tool, clinical tool. And then we can talk about, the processes, the clinical validity. We try to stay away from clinical diagnosis. We think that can be a tool, but there's always should be a human present. But yeah, we'll talk a bit more about that. Thanks for some of your insights.
Yes.
You have an extensive background in prevention medicine, chronic disease, schizophrenia, and addiction. How did working closely with these sorts of patients shape the way that you design and evaluate AI systems now?
When you have clinical data, it's usually very chaotic data. Of course, NLP can analyze a data set, a normal data set, but the thing when you work with schizophrenic and psychotic data, it gives you a better perspective on diversity and on equity. For example, I might have many examples, but all the associations, all the interpretations, even in normal data, you will always need the clinical judgment to analyze it with the NLP, because you go in any hospitals, as I told you, that data in hospitals are chaotic. They try to make it structured and conform, but usually it's very chaotic. So you have to interpret all that. You can write patient is fine, or read patient is fine, or blood pressure 0. You have some stuff that is some words that are very, I can say, scary, because the patient is alive and you will see this data that make no sense. So you will always need the clinical judgment. But the thing, when you add the mental health data set, it gives you a much more equitable data set. In real life, you don't see like normal people. You will see a depressive patient. You will see a psychotic one. Well, they might have blood pressure also. You will see someone coming from a vulnerable community. So this gave me much more sensitivity, what you call sensitivity, cultural sensitivity on the diversity that is really needed when you build an NLP model, equity and diversity.
Can you explain for the listeners and for someone like me, what does NLP stand for?
Natural language processing. It's a subgroup of deep learning. Basically, it analyzes words in a mathematical word. It embeds words, try to predict the other words. There is different way to do it, but basically this is deep learning models, and we're seeing the beauty of NLP today with all these chatbots and LLM and ChatGPT and so on. So I think it might have begun in 2003, those models, but now we have very, very beautiful ones. Yeah.
So you brought up diversity, equity, inclusion, and what is the correlation that you see here between these different groups, and how is that related to the question?
When you let's say I'm analyzing, one of my job is analyzing clinical notes, and there is very small nuances in the clinical notes. Okay, for a normal patient, you will just have like blood pressure, diagnosis, treatment, and then the NLP model will have to predict the next follow-up or what treatment or what will be the most likely diagnosis, for example. This would be for normal people. Even for more normal people, usually the data is going to be quite chaotic anyways. But if you have a psychotic patient or a depressive patient, you might be able to interpret the data with nuances. You need some clinical judgment. You need some insights to interpret the data in different ways. So you need to. That's why I think when you build an NLP model in a clinical setting, in clinical settings, you definitely need clinician. First, the model will be better, and secondly, even to deploy it, they will trust you more. You cannot put all the patients in one group. You need to include diversity in the data set. The data set has to be diverse and include symptoms of psychotic patient, of schizophrenic patient, hallucination, free associations that are not well done. And the Christian might know even better than me all the symptoms, but there is a diversity of symptoms that can even be subjective sometimes. You cannot always take it by the word. So a patient is fine can mean many things. I mean, but you can, in any clinical note, you will read patient is fine. So what does it mean? Patient is fine. He's fine. He's better than the last time. He's better than last year. He's okay. Some people, even they will say he's dead, but he's almost dead, but okay, he's fine, but he will die tomorrow. Okay. so
yeah, thanks for the insight. And yes,
what I mean is the context. NLP is very good at analyzing the words, but the context, you need someone in the field to add the context.
very good notes. That's what we're paying our tax dollar here in Canada. You know, those doctors that say patient is fine. That's great. Okay, now I know. So, you know, in terms of diversity, it's good. We can think about it in the NLP or AI way, but also like in terms of helping understand. We've also talked about neurodiversity, right? So a neurodiversity might be ADHD, gifted spectrum, schizophrenia, autism, or that affects the patient population. And also we talked about the subjectivity of the doctor and clinicians, or it could be nurse and others, right? So in terms of understanding that context and complexity, I think it's very important to mention that, you know, both human and machine are still living in a very, very complex world that is very context and environment dependent. And that to just say, well, this is a blanket solution without going further and understanding that would be misguided, right? So thanks for bringing this elements in the conversations in terms of subjectivity, right? You know, we can think about knowledge as something that is static or dynamic. And I think it's more dynamic and includes all those elements. It might even include what the clinician was feeling that day or ate in the morning and how he wrote the note, right? So all those things can be conceptualized and hopefully more and more talked about and understood. And for the viewers, Sami is also telling you that if you're not normal, then that's normal. So going back to the deeper in the mental health aspect now, can you tell me a little bit about your understanding of schizophrenia and how a psychosis might be revealed? We worked with researchers that look at text and tone in the voice or in the text that might detect potential psychosis. Mark and I talked in a different podcast about how AI can induce psychosis. Tell us a bit about your understanding of psychological condition, and specifically, perhaps let's start with schizophrenia.
Okay, schizophrenia is a very complex disease. It's a multifactorial disease. Usually it begins very earlier in man, usually at 18 years old. They might have some few symptoms. They might have some family backgrounds or no. They might take some drugs that are going to trigger the disease or no. And a little bit later on women, usually around 25. It's a very big disability because usually these people, they cannot, in the severe form, it's difficult for them to work or to live a normal life. So you have different kind of symptoms, and Christian might know them very well. You have what we call the positive symptoms and the negative symptoms. Actually, you have some very good treatments for the positive symptoms, the antipsychotics, and positive symptoms usually is hallucination, auditive hallucination, and sometimes even it can be very severe hallucination. And then you have the negative symptoms that we call the Schneiderian symptoms. Those are much more debilitating for the patient. So the thing is that the sooner you catch it, as any disease in medicine, the sooner you catch it, the better you can intervene in it. So let's for example, if you can catch just a small symptom of schizophrenia at 18 years or at 16 years old, you can try to treat it before it gets worse, before you catch it. Because the problem with disease, and especially chronic disease, even in mental health, is that you catch people very late. It's the same problem in cancer. It's a problem with heart disease in all the world, but even in Canada. That's the thing with primary care medicine. That's one of the main purpose of primary medicine is to catch things early and not intervene lately, right? Because most of the diseases are at least preventable. So for the same way you can catch a cancer early, you can try to catch a schizophrenic patient early in the notes, like by a symptom or two that can look weird, a little bit weird for the physician or for the nurse, but in fact it's just at the beginning of the schizophrenia that will probably be catched at 30 years old or maybe 5 or more, or after very big troubles, and then you can catch it at 15 or 18 years old or 20. That's one of the beautiful things, and for the future in mental health care is to be able to detect people with risk factors in primary care disease. and with symptoms, just by symptoms. However, I think in system, in workflow for now, because actually implementing models in diagnosis and treatments and prognosis, it's very, very, and it should be very, very legally framed. And you need to do a pilot project in research center, and so on before deployed. So for now, I'm not much on those tasks, but I think that could be very good things to do in the future. However, for me, I'm more in the what we call the extrinsic cognitive load of the doctor and the nurses. Because as Swellen said in 2008, he made a study to analyze the different kind of cognitive load. There is extrinsic cognitive load and intrinsic cognitive load. So a bad use of AI will take off the extrinsic and the intrinsic cognitive load, while a good use of AI will just take you the extrinsic cognitive load, which are for the doctor or nurse, for example, administrative tasks, filling documents, all the administrative and I would say boring tasks. That's why I'm focusing now. But the intrinsic cognitive load, which we find in any expertise in psychology, like Christian or in any field, it's very important first for the quality of the act, that it has to be well supervised and well done. And secondly, for the development of the expertise. I mean, if the AI begin to be a doctor and do the intrinsic work or begin to be a psychologist and so on, first there is a question of responsibility. Of course, we can talk about this. But secondly, there is a question of expertise. How are you going to develop your judgment, your expertise? How are you going to teach students, even students, how are they going to learn to be? Because you have to do the intrinsic cognitive work to be able to be an expert in any field. That's what we call the bad AI. And that's what we should a little bit, at least, be aware of what might happen in the future. But the good AI, this is I would say the routine stuff, the administrative tasks, all that can make us still become experts in the field, still be good doctors or good psychologists or good nurses, but be more efficient and be more human, because you will have less burnout. I mean, this is very boring. All these administrative tasks, it looks very simple, but when you add one and the other, this is I'm pretty sure it's a very important cause of burnout. Yeah. So
and when you say more human, we also know that not only the task, but there has been this pressure as some healthcare system that clinicians don't have time with their patients, right? So if you're using AI to increase the real human connection, you can increase, time, quality of care, and really also insights, because if the clinician spends more time, then his expertise can also be enabled by that, extra interaction that wasn't there before, right?
Absolutely. If we know how to, I do believe that if we know how to use AI in the good way, it can be a very, very powerful way to become much more better physicians, better psychologists, better nurses, and better for the patient at the end, especially the vulnerable ones. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing about the intrinsic and extrinsic cognitive loads. I didn't know about that, so I learned already something, and hope the audience did today. I did want to come back to, an earlier thing, especially for the rest of the audience. When we talked about schizophrenia, you mentioned about the negative and the positive. So everyone can imagine or have heard of the positive, which is hallucination. It could be, as you mentioned, audiovisual or more sensorial. Then there's also, the ability for some kind of schizophrenia patient to maybe have associated like paranoia and other positive symptoms. Can you explain more to us and the audience what would be some examples of the negative symptoms of schizophrenia?
Well, the Schneiderian symptoms, if I do remember, there is 9 of them that it has been described. I don't remember which year, but I think it was in the 50s or something like that. So schizophrenia exists in all the societies, okay? It might have different manifestations, different prodromes, but the negative symptoms are the most difficult ones. It's disorganization, not only disorganization every day, but disorganization of your thoughts. Positive symptoms, you can see them. It's very obvious. Negative symptoms is there is what we call in French liberté, association. The ideas are not linear. It's like they don't follow. Yeah. There is also incoherence of the talks, incoherence of the ideas. Yeah, idée de reference ideas. Yeah, I don't know them by heart, but I know how to recognize them. But it's very pathognomonic of schizophrenia. Usually people don't have the 9 of them. It's just they describe 9 of them. Usually people, they have 2, 3, 4, but these are the most debilitating symptoms for schizophrenia. But the thing is that, okay, this is good for a research project, okay, because as I told you, this work is much more, we're getting in the intrinsic cognitive work of the doctor. So if there is a project that like this, I think it would help a lot of people in any society, I mean, but it has first to be done by some researcher psychiatrists in a psychiatric institute, well supervised, and then it could be deployed in primary care. Primary care will definitely benefit from that, but it has to be well studied in, for example, here, I have done 1 year of research in Institut de Santé Mentale du Québec in 2000. So maybe they can do it there, build the model, and then deploy it in primary care. We are in the intrinsic cognitive work, cognitive load and work of the doctor. So this is much more sensitive in a legal and ethical way, okay? And even if it's used, the doctor has always to supervise it, because I do believe has full responsibility of the doctor and the nurse. AI is an assistant. AI cannot replace a professional.
We're in the same idea here, and we're talking again about supporting clinician or non-clinician with tools and not replacing them or diagnosing. It's a diagnostic support or a track that someone should follow up, and that person should be human. So thanks for explaining that further. And again, it's very interesting. You talked about prevention, right? So I wrote an article years ago about the 3 Ps of how medicine is moving, right? So there's predictive, preventative, and personalized, right? So we want to have more personalized. We talked about diversity, how all those things are important to be more, not generic, but personalized to that person, to what they did, 6 months ago, 12 months ago. Is he almost dead or okay based on that person? Maybe someone looks dead, but he's okay because that's that person, right? So, and then his thoughts might be also different, right? So to bring that preventative aspect and proactivity, right? That's really what our mission is. Let's not wait the healthcare system to be broken because we didn't prevent anything. And then you diagnose too late, you get all the problems later when we could have prevented many of those things, right? Might have been physical, mental health, wellness, and well-being in general. And I think we're on the same mission as you, Sami. And thanks for sharing those insights to the audience and to us. We're both learning today, so that's great. Thanks.
I do have a question regarding a follow-up question regarding the negative schizophrenia symptoms. Typically, it's harder to treat negative schizophrenia because it mimics signs of clinical depression. How do you distinguish, because if the symptoms are very similar to clinical depression, how do you use the models or the data to actually distinguish between a case of clinical depression and negative schizophrenia?
Depression is very well documented. It's very well documented in this DSM-4, 5. You have symptoms, decrease of the mood, feeling guilt for at least 2 weeks, a whole day. He's not able to work or have difficulty with relationship with family or with his wife. So it's very well documented depression, and you have very good questionnaires and questions to ask in any clinical settings anywhere, not only in Canada but in most of the countries. You have the Beck questionnaire, you have Hamilton. Usually you have anxieties with depressions. So depression is very well documented. So any good doctor will be able to diagnose a depression. What might be more difficult is for a good doctor is to distinguish a psychotic depression from a schizophrenia, for example. A depression with the psychotic ideas or something like that, that's more fancy. Yeah. That's a more fancy diagnosis. But for a regular depression, like we see every day in any clinic, I think doctors are well trained to diagnose it, to make the diagnostic. But schizophrenia is another family. Depression is in the mood family. Schizophrenia is more in the psychotic family. Psychotic, you lose contact with reality, you lose your judgment, you don't have the judgment. Depression is like you keep your judgment. You speak slowly, you think slowly, you're sad, you cry, you might have suicidal ideas, a different degree, but at least you can think about them sometimes. But psychotic, he must lose contact with reality. He's not in contact with reality. So this is one of the most important criteria. So even in the psychosis family, there is different psychosis. So I think the $100 question would be how we differentiate, how the NLP model might differentiate between a psychosis and a schizophrenia or a brief psychosis. Honestly, I think primary care. This is a psychiatric question. This is when I see a if I see a person with a psychosis in primary care, I need to think my model, at least the model, the NLP model that I built, they need to make the triage. It's not a psychosis. Okay, go on the mood family. But if it's a psychosis, you just send him to the psychiatrist because it's very difficult. You need to know what kind of psychosis is it. Some are very light. Some is just someone has take some drugs and it's going to be a brief psychotic episode for 1 month. And for another person, it can be the beginning of a long psychotic disease, like a schizophrenia for all his life. And that we'll have to fight this all his life. So here we need a specialized mental health support. But in primary care, my point, I'm always focused prevention. I think this is where we can get the better impact for any society. It's to catch things very early. The sooner you catch anything in medicine, the better is it, because you will have red flags. There is always a red flag. There is no disease. No one is born like with all the disease. There is always like some red flags that can be make a wake up call for any doctor that think, bing. And I do believe that NLP can be a very powerful assistant to any doctor, or nurse in any clinical settings for red flags and for having all these slides and be able to catch people early. That's what I believe. But even though this is in the intrinsic cognitive role, even though I'm very excited to work in projects like this, and if there is any project, I might be very excited to work in those projects. But for now, as I told you, I'm more focused on the extrinsic law. This is what is more realistic with all the legal framework, because there is a reality, right? Reality is that medicine is very conservative profession, and all the legal framework and the ethical framework, which they're right to be so conservative, because we don't know AI what it will be in a few years, and it's evaluating every month. So, but that's why now I'm focusing more on AI governance. That's why I will talk to you a little bit later, because deploying a model is something I have worked on many research projects, and then the bug is what's when to deploy it just after. And I had great accuracy. Even my latest project, I can tell you about 99.6% accuracy, and we have worked months and weeks and teams and so on. But at the end, it's just a model that will end up in a GitHub or in a paper or I don't know somewhere, but never in real life. Because to be able to deploy in real life, you need a very good governance, and that's why now I'm developing this expertise in AI governance. I think this is where it's as important, or maybe even more important, in our time than the model in itself. The governance is all the legal framework, who's going to be responsible of the model, who's going to monitor it when it fails, who's going to be able to ask the questions, who's going to improve the model. I'm more in clinical AI governance now.
Thanks for sharing. And, to stay a bit in the mental, aspect, mental health, mental wellness, if we go, we talked about depression and schizophrenia. You mentioned depression is quite easy to diagnose with all the, GAD-7 and all the other tools. And you mentioned it also, the two biggest mental health issues are depression and anxiety. So let's switch a bit to anxiety and not only talk about PHQ scales, but what do you see as, we are always seeing that anxiety is actually increasing more than depression in the world in general. One of the things because of screen time, work culture, less connection, more stress. What do you see are opportunities? And, at all, we've already developed some AI to help helping you breathe better and regulate your emotional system. Lumi is helping you think about it. Also, the digital reset are giving you kind of the opportunity to pause and be calm and to challenge your negative thoughts of anxiety of I need to do this, right? But, what are some of the ideas that you think that we should discuss or think and bring? How can we scalably up anxiety?
Yeah. From an addiction perspective, I think addiction is a very big problem. If you see it broadly and widely, it's not only drugs. Yeah, of course, we have drug addiction, alcohol addiction, porn addiction, internet addiction, AI addiction, computer addiction. It's very, very, very large addiction. So, of course, it's a brain reward disorder. It's someone who his brain always asks for the same reward. So, of course, the opportunity for data, and for example, for the work of Christian, this is a very Christian can with AWU. He has a great opportunity to detect and even help, because data can approach it without judgment first, and data can detect early signals before even the patient cross any clinic or any else. And addiction is a huge problem in the world if you see it widely, if you see it as ideally and theoretically as a wide problem.
Because it's a scale, and again, we're really clear that we can use the word addiction, but more likely it's a scale of behavior behavior, right? It's a compulsive behavior that is compulsive to different degrees. We're talking about neuroscience, not just a diagnosis. We talked about the DSM-5 and ICD-9 or 11. We can say this person is addicted, but by the way, it is only today. Tomorrow, they might not be addicted, right? Based on those classifications, it's actually looking at a 6 months window. But people think, you are an addict. You're not. You're just having addictive behavior or compulsive behavior at that time. And when you understand the spectrum, like you said, probably 90+% of the world have some addictive behavior every day, right today. There's something that you do that's addictive, right? That is hard for you to stop. And when you conceptualize like that, then you can kind of prevent that from becoming problematic.
What I've learned in Sherbrooke also is all the biopsychosocial framework, like model the whole person, not all the symptoms. Don't see the addiction as a symptom only. Of course, there is a brain reward disorder, but try always to approach the whole person. So I think that I offer this opportunity to approach it without judgment, and it might help at least prevent and even detect people with addiction. And some people are not even aware of their addiction. They're just in their behavior, and for them, it's not an addiction. So I think it's a good opportunity, like for the tool, like Lumi and so on, if they can even integrate this, and hopefully one day in clinical settings also, that could be nice. Yes. So and the thing also, data is objective. It helps, but it does not replace empathy. It does not replace humans, but it can even freeze empathy from bias. That's what I've learned. I mean, you can be empathic with data. If you have the data perspective, you can be empathic without bias, or at least less bias.
So are you telling me that I'm irreplaceable, or no, there's an AI coming for me?
No, I think, I don't know if you have worked in hospitals, Christian, but AI is like the perfect resident or intern. You have probably done an internship in your PhD. So he's a perfect intern. He's always bright, always smiling, never complaining. He's available 24/7, even at 3 a.m. But you sign off. So if he fall off, you fall off with him. You cannot blame him for any mistake. But beside that, he's a perfect resident. He's a perfect intern or the perfect resident, but you sign off. That's how I can see it. Okay, how can I see that AI might evaluate in the future if we monitor well, if we use it well, not the bad AI, the good AI. I mean the AI that keep our judgment and expertise keep evaluating. Of course, a good AI for me is an irresponsible AI, but it's an AI that because we always learn every day. I think we always learn, even in our field. Even if we have studied the field for many years, we learn. So if you stop learning, and if AI do learn at you stop being your judgment and your expertise is going to decrease. So you might be efficient for a few days or few weeks, but in the longer run, you might even lose your confidence in your expertise. So if you use AI wisely, and for each task you do, even as an expert, you separate the task before you do it. What's the extrinsic load and the intrinsic load? And some people even talk about the German load. That's an interesting concept, but it's a little bit controversial. But for now, we'll talk about intrinsic load. But if and you use it responsibly, I think AI can be very, very useful and a game changer in healthcare in general, in mental health care, but in primary care in all the fields. Yeah.
I did not quite hear the word, the controversial concept. Can you repeat?
The German load. This is a word that Swellen used in his. There is extrinsic cognitive load, the intrinsic cognitive load, and the German load. It's like a focused intrinsic cognitive load that really developed the expertise of the person using AI. But this is a controversial. Even Swellen, in his second paper in 2011 or 2012, he nuanced this concept. So I prefer use extrinsic and intrinsic. It's more accepted in the scientific community.
Well, as somebody in Germany, I can understand the load of having to deal with Germans. So that terrible joke. I'm sorry. But the NLP, is increasingly used to analyze clinical notes, patient records, and even social media for early mental health signs. That's becoming increasingly common. I think there's an episode of Black Mirror where actually they take all the social media data from a person and they create an avatar after they've died. So basically you can talk to this person after they've died based on all like the social media input. How much can you really learn about a person and the onset of mental health disorders from basically their activity online? Does it give an accurate clinical picture? Are there biases involved there? And is that an exciting shift for you rather than just relying on the clinical transcripts that you see between clinicians and patients?
I think a good clinician or even an expert in mental health care can learn a lot from online activities. diagnosis from words. I mean, a mental health care specialist is trained to put a diagnosis after usually 1 hour, not more than 2 hours of interview. If he has in his profession hours of online activities, that's a lot of data. And of course, from the words, from the tone, of course, you don't see when you see a person, you have what we call the examen mental. You can see the person, how he talks, how he articulates, and so on. But even without seeing the person, just with online activities alone, you can have a lot of insights. Yeah, I think a good clinician can diagnose a depression only on online activity, can diagnose a psychosis, can recognize a psychopath. I think you can have a lot of diagnoses online. I do believe that. Yeah.
So we had some person in a research team that was previously looking at social media biomarkers in terms of eating disorders, especially for younger girls. And yes, they was able to track and to kind of predict and help people in a preventive way, saying, hey, those conversations, those words, those interactions, looking like you might be having an eating disorder. So I think it can be useful in different circumstances. I do want to come back to Mark's question, though, as in, are there biases? Of course, because, who can tell me that their online life is exactly the way that the real life are, right? So when you're posting or interacting online, you're trying to also have a positivity bias of trying to think that you're better. Of course, there are some people that post negative things online, but mostly people are trying to show their better side of themselves and hide some of the, maybe more internal things that they're facing. So I think we have to take that into consideration as well when we're looking at social media, to acknowledge that it's not the real life. And that's also something that creates tension as people are consuming social media and thinking that other people's online life is real and then feeling bad about it.
Yes, I agree with Christian. That's a very good point. That's a very good point. There is a social media addiction also, by the way. I think Christian might talk to us about, but I'm pretty sure that there might be also other internet addiction, AI addiction. So addiction is very broad, and maybe in the DSM-6, there might be new diagnoses for the AI use.
Everyone will be addicted and then the clinicians will be full. So then we'll need AI for
I don't know if you've seen the news, but there's a landmark trial going on against Mark Zuckerberg and Meta right now in Los Angeles, and where they're being sued basically by parents of children who believe that they have gotten addicted to the social media platforms. And the lawyers on their end are actually arguing that clinically it's not an addiction, right? And I actually did research on this and also found that it doesn't fit the typical parameters that you see in substance use disorders. However, it is problematic usage, right? So it might become a little bit difficult to use typical biomarkers to classify it as an addiction. However, the behavior itself, right, and the way that people express themselves online, you're talking a lot about collecting data to really classify the way that we interface with technology as an addiction rather than it just being normal usage, correct?
I mean, when I was a pediatric intern a long time ago, I remember that I have the study of maximum 2 hours of screen for children, all screens, computer, telephone, everything. I think we're far from that today, but this gives you an idea of what is healthy. Of course, there is a mental addictions, but there's also physical consequences that we don't know. I mean, you don't know the consequence in the long term. It has not been studied, that the consequence for the eyes, the consequence for the back. There's many consequences that we might know in the future. But of course, there's a mental addiction. At a personal level, I know that I'm addicted to something. I just trust my judgment and my insight. I in the long run, after 2 or 3 times, I just feel less energized. I feel drained. I just feel that something is not normal, and that's how I auto-diagnose myself addicted. If I go on a computer for working, it's okay. But if I spend many hours on Facebook every day, at some point after 3 or 4 days, I will feel like empty inside. I will feel drained. I will feel it's not a fulfilling life. I mean, you cannot. Outside there is sun. You can go have a run. You can go have fun. You can go spending more than 2 or 3 hours on Facebook every day is not a healthy life. I mean, you don't need to be a doctor to understand that. I mean, there is a short-term consequences that we might know. I'm not even talking about the bad influences that we might find on Facebook. Facebook is like an ocean. There's so many people. There might be freak people. There might be criminals. I mean, leaving children to Facebook is like taking your child in putting it, I don't know, any dangerous place in the world and you leave it there. I mean, this is not safe. These are parents might not be responsible doing that because it's not safe places. You need to protect your child. You need to be with who he's in contact with and so on. This is another side of the problem. I'm not talking about addiction, but I'm talking about bad influences and detecting and preventing criminal behaviors by having good influences in the youth. The more that will have good influence and good education, the less criminality you will have by preventing. But that's another side. Now I'm talking more about the addiction side. There are studies on that. I'm not the expert in this field, but I have some benchmarks that I've learned in my studies. And one of these benchmarks is the 2 hours.
Yeah, we will nuance that it also depends on the use of screen, right? So it's not just the hours, but the intentionality and if you're watching it alone and with others. And, we help parents and schools to talk about this and to find the real solutions because the information that is given out here is normally outdated. Those studies are not as relevant as we thought. It's not about the amount of time. It's about much more than that. To come back to what you were saying about going beyond mental, we're also, very conscious about the holistic right? So holistic health, not just mentally, but physically. And as you mentioned, neck pain, how it is affecting your eyes and eyesight because your screen, the blue lights, all those things we're very conscious about. And another thing that, we developed the smarter phone. If you want more information on awedigitalwellness.com, we have as a product the smarter phone, which helps especially youth challenge them to go outside and walk in nature, to go to the swimming pool, to go spend time with their friends, to stand up and cook dinner for their parents, right? So it's not only about the mental, but you mentioned it's like the physical. We can talk about rates of obesity going up and linked to other, cardiac.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thanks for your insight on that. And yes, we are very concerned about some of those social media, tech, AI use. And we're not against tech, but we're trying to create tech for good, like you are in a clinical setting or a non-clinical setting. And they're all linked to increasing well-being and wellness for a broader population, not just one patient or potential patient at a time. We actually want less patient and more happy people running outside and talking to each other, no?
I just wanted to jump in quickly and say we had a comment come in from LinkedIn from Randy Maxisak. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name. Agentic AI, not traditional AI, assists clinicians by acting as an autonomous, proactive partner that reduces administrative burdens, enhances clinical decision-making, and can extend patient care beyond traditional office hours. Agentic AI is designed with human-in-the-loop constraints to prevent over-reliance and ensure safety, particularly in high-risk psychiatric cases. Thank you, Randy, for that comment. Any comments on Randy's comment here?
I love it. I think, the wording is quite perfect in terms of enhancing clinical care, not only in replacing or diagnosing and creating an agent, which, again, human in the loop. I think, Randy, thank you. You want to come work with us? Let us know. This is exactly what we do at A, right? Human-centric, human in the loop, enhancing care, preventing, enabling. Those are basically the comment is, I love it. So thanks for that, Randy. Sami, any other comments on agentic AI?
Well, I mean, this can be of course, a RAG, agentic AI. This can be, of course, very interesting things to try, or we might have some expectation for them. But what I think is always keep in mind the responsible. I mean, anything that can help the physician, the workflow is good, but always keep in mind that the full responsibility, as long as we don't have explainability is very important also. Even if the professional is responsible, if you want a professional trust your device or your app or your model, you might be able to explain why it's working. And this is one of, I do believe, future of the research in AI, because not all the models are explainable. The more you will be able to explain it, the more people will trust it. So agentic AI is also very promising, like other models like RAG and other LLM. But what would be even better is to be able to explain why they work.
I love that, because we've talked about years that we have this kind of black box idea that we are not sure how to describe some algorithms, some AI, some processing, and the explainability of it is both ethical and useful to kind of seeing what's the best, what doesn't work. And tell me some of the solutions that we're starting to see. How can we start to explain some of those models, agents, and others?
That's a research question. I mean, some of them, I know that very simple models are explainable, decision trees and so on. But as long as you get in deep learning, the black box is very big. There is very researcher working on this field.
So not yet.
I don't think we're not close to it. I think it's a very interesting and promising avenue for the future, but we're not close yet. And that's another obstacle for the deployment at scale for diagnosis and treatments and for clinicians to trust it. That's why I do think focusing on the extrinsic load is much more realistic. And what is even more important for me at this point is the AI governance, because developing a model explaining why it works is good. Even if it works, you have to make sure that you have all the governance, which is after that, it's much more difficult part. And ideally always work with people on the ground, whatever the field. I mean, me on the healthcare, especially if you work on the intrinsic load, always try to have people on the ground with you to improve. Because as I told you, just analyzing some messy data, the best NLP model will can miss the vulnerable patient, like psychotic patient, we can miss diversity. So you will need some clinical insight to improve the model, to improve the features, to make it more realistic and so on. Yeah.
So we talked about, and thanks again, Sami, we talked about the idea that it's still difficult for us to explain, what the model is actually doing. Now, can you maybe explain to the listener, how do you actually try to teach the AI, what they're going to become proficient, right? So how can they understand, for instance, we talked about medical records or notes. How can you teach the AI? How can we understand that process?
As I told you, this is the poetic image of alchemy. I mean, you have very chaotic data. It's really insightful. It's gold. You have a lot of information in the clinical data, a lot of information. I mean, the clinical data are really gold in the poetic sense. You can extract a lot of insights just from these data, a lot of insights. Interesting insight, drastically improve the work of physician and patients from that. So that's what I believe, especially the new NLP model, and especially that they're getting better. Even with actual NLP, we can do great things, and they're getting better every month. So I don't know, in 1 year or even in few months, what we might be able to do. This is very, very promising. I'm very excited about being in that. This is so exciting. However, as I said, for me, the best AI will never be better than a perfect resident. And even with the perfect resident, always smiling, always working, never in burnout, you always sign off. So that's the responsible part that will never goes. So we're working on to have the perfect resident. So, yeah, I like this image. But I like both image, the perfect resident and the alchemy, transforming. And what is the most important part, we're not looking for the result. We're looking for the process, the rigorous process. When we analyze data, it's like the Alchemist of Paulo Coelho. The main idea of the book is transformation happen to the rigorous process. It's by rigorously analyzing the data that we might have interesting things. It's not by the destination so in Paulo Coelho, he traveled the world and to end up understanding that the travel is not important, but it's all the process and the transformation that he did that changed him at the end of the book.
Well, I can say the same thing. I've traveled the world, and it's the internal transformation that it's traveling not to see, but to understand, and the wisdom that you get from that. I really relate. Can you read the follow-up question?
Not a question, but developing AI agents, not at that point yet. Very challenging indeed, but I'm in the process of learning. Appreciate attending. We appreciate you too, Randy. Thank you so much for attending.
In terms of EHR, we've partnered already with some EHR and EMR companies. As we're scaling, we are trying to bridge kind of the medical and the non-medical wellness and well-being at A, working with clinics, working with healthcare, working with schools, working with organizations. Just spoke to an HR leader this morning about his challenges in wellness and his teams. And, what can we think about data, electrical, medical, or healthcare record, and how that might be also useful for other organizations, schools, non-medical? Can we go a little bit outside of the healthcare and see what are you seeing and what can you share with the audience?
As I told you, ethic. I try to be always very, very ethic, 100% ethics. And one of the main values, or the ethical principle is transparency, of course, and explainability. In this transparency value, explainability of the model might very help. But the other values as fairness, as we said, talk about diversity and so on, try to have a non-biased data. So you will have non-biased outcome. And the other important value is privacy. Privacy is extremely important one, and especially in healthcare, it's sacred. I don't know of one of you guys, when you go to a doctor or your nurse, you will tell him one of your secret stories and so on. You don't want this to be on the news or to be available to everybody or to be on internet. We all want it to be private, and so privacy is sacred in healthcare, but I do believe it's applicable to all the fields. Privacy is a fundamental value, and so when you work in data, you need the consent of the patients, and you need the consent of what data you can use and what you don't use, and you need to be able to assure the security. So all the security cloud is has a big promising future, securing the cloud, especially when you work with healthcare data. It needs to be HIPAA compliant. It needs to be compliant to all the legal framework of healthcare. So privacy is a very important value when we're talking about data, and especially healthcare data. It's sacred. And then as we talked about also accountability, of course, responsible AI. I talked many times about it. I would say also to people who have clinical background, if they're in psychology or medicine, it's an advantage. I mean, working in data while having a clinical background, it's an advantage. I mean, you will, hold on to it. I mean, just the ethical judgment that you have from clinic, the technical competence and all that. This is inseparable from the data science field. Data science field needs people like that. I mean, it's very, yeah. Did I answer to your question, Christian?
Yes, thank you. That's, good ways of thinking about how we can conceive better. And as you know, we're very concerned about ethical AI and governance as we're building many AI products, more to come in the coming months, to look at specific issues in different industries and make sure that they're, not only compliant, but ideally that they're created with this ethical framework of privacy as a core, not just to comply to HIPAA or GDPR or wherever rules. It's not about the external, it's about the internal ideation of something that has value and that creates this human first approach, which is data is useful if it's consented and if it gives back some outcome. It could be in the clinical world, good health outcome, or it can be good well-being in general, or productivity, depending on the metrics you want to look.
The other major value is transparency. Transparency is very, very important. For me, it has always been a natural quality, but it depends. It improves even because I have dealt with at some point with the opaque people and even sometimes opaque systems. So transparency is a very important value, especially for explainability, especially for transparency is a very, very important value. You need to be able to explain what you do clearly. If you want to be trusted, if you want some good AI, you need to be very, very transparent. Yeah.
Well, thanks again. And we're talking about technology and tech for good. So tech for healthcare, tech for wellness and well-being, tech for mental health prevention. And can you tell us a little bit more broadly about, I see a lot of good intentions and might we say like compassion, which is one of our 7C framework for happiness, right? So can you tell me more about compassion in life in general, in healthcare and business and organization? How can we bring more compassion to the world, Sami?
For me, at a personal level, I will talk about a personal level and then from a data perspective. At a personal level, I think if you're happy, if you're peaceful, while having boundaries also, because you cannot save all the world, you can be more empathic with people. You can understand people. If you're struggling inside of yourself, it's chaos inside of yourself, it's very difficult to be empathic. I mean, you need to be in peace with yourself first, to see the world clearly and to see the world who are struggling, to see people who are suffering. Then you can understand more people and be more empathic. That's at a personal level. Then from a data perspective, I think data can analyze things objectively. And because even in our empathy, sometimes we're biased. We might be more empathic for a vulnerable group than another and so on. We might be more sensitive to to a situation or history or for a country than another and so on. But data, when we do it very rigorously, as I said, very rigorously, it can take off the bias even in empathy. So even empathy, it might be a kind of objective empathy. So that's what I like in data.
Wow. I mean, I wrote the whole section of my first book, Beyond Happy, talking about the difference between empathy and compassion. And I think you said it very eloquently. And it's kind of the bias in empathy, right? So when we're talking about data, we're talking about bias, but I describe it as ego amplification, right? So empathy can seem like an amazing buzzword and it's cool. Everyone wants to be empathic. I say no. I think we should be more compassionate than empathic. One of the reasons you mentioned, especially for the healthcare workers, the doctors, the nurses, the EMRs, people get empathy fatigue. Sometimes it's misnomed as compassion fatigue, but no, that's not correct. Empathy and compassion have different brain neurological signature. And the empathy is the one that's from the default mode and that can have a fatigue. Compassion theoretically doesn't have a fatigue. Compassion is the intention to decrease suffering and can be infinite. Yeah.
And I do believe also by decreasing the extrinsic cognitive load of the healthcare provider, not only in Canada, but everywhere in the world, we can drastically relieve burnout because the administrative tasks are huge. This is a task that AI can drastically decrease in the next years or decades. Of course, burnout are complex. Then it's not only about the tasks that we do. Sometimes there is a toxic environment. Sometimes there is less recognition for our work or low quality job and so on. There's many reasons, but one of the reasons of burnouts is in healthcare is the increased amount of documents, and this AI can drastically improve and also improve efficiency in workflows, making the work much more efficient. I really believe that.
I love that, Sami. And you mentioned kind of, when we know about psychology, psychiatry, and neuroscience here, all three of us, right? So we know that human brain are intrinsically and almost constantly biased. Everything is a subjective experience. We have, positive bias, negative bias. We have, like you mentioned, empathic bias, right? That's very important for the audience to understand what empathic bias means.
Absolutely.
It means you have empathy for the people that are closer to you. You have empathy for your country. When there's a war, you choose sides. When there's a person that needs money, you can say you're empathic, but you choose one over the other. If you want to be compassionate, you'd be compassionate to every single human being that exists at the same time. But with empathy, it's not possible, right? So,
absolutely.
And that's one of the things that AI can help us, if we do it in a rigorous way, is to think more equally without those human biases, right? So
absolutely. Objective empathy, fair empathy, and data can help us reach this, or at least try to reach this level, because it's an idealistic level, but we should all, if we want peace and feeling good about ourselves, we should all try to reach this level of objective empathy, I do believe. Yes, that's a very good point.
That's great. And to come back to the more individualistic way to become more compassionate. You said also very important and true fact. It's very difficult to be compassionate when you're dysregulated, when you're not at peace. And Mark, do you want to share with the audience what are some of the ways that we can help people be at peace? Because before you want to try to help others, as they say in the airplane, put your mask on first before helping your children. Maybe I won't put the mask on my children. I don't like them. No, I'm just joking. My bad sense of humor. So Mark, what can we do to help people get some peace and calm so that they can also help others with empathy, hopefully even more with compassion and with care?
Yeah, well, I was just talking to a client today about just the act of observing the thoughts the moment that they arise. So classic mindfulness. This client has a case of generalized anxiety disorder and was in a hotel room and started having just a mental breakdown. And I asked her, like, what thought came up in that environment? What was so different? Because she was excited on the way to going to the hotel. And she said, I just felt very alone. So there was a meaning in that thought. There was a meaning of being alone and just complete despair. And that's what caused this anxious reaction. So what I asked her was just to notice in her body what was happening and just try to objectively observe it instead of actually trying to assign a meaning to that. So something that people can do who are watching this, if they want to become more at peace with themselves, is just to notice what is it that's causing you to not be at peace, right? Is it a thought? Is it something that you haven't forgiven? Is it some sort of resentment that you hold towards other people? And just ask yourself, okay, what would it mean to to let go of this just for a few moments and observe what happens in your body. That would be the first piece of advice.
Very good and practical. Thanks for your insight, talking about, real people situation. You might not be in a hotel, you might be in some other situation, but I'm sure that all of us have had these moments where we're having, and we're not even talking about diagnosis of anxiety, but we've all had those stress and anxiety moments when we're stressed, and then we cannot help and take care of others. We cannot have and entertain compassion to others, and we can also help people have self-compassion, right? So that's also the desire for ourselves to have less suffering, and that's one of our mission at A is to increase happiness, decrease suffering, increase well-being individually, and also at the community, organization, schools, and learning institutions, and healthcare, as we're talking about today. To have all these layers of increase peace. Maybe we can help countries increase peace, which seems to be difficult if you watch the news or social media too much. But it is possible. It's not just idealistic. We can do it step by step and day by day. And also, thanks, Mark, for your comments. A practical tool. If you want to learn more, Mark and myself do some resets at A Digital Wellness or awedigitalwellness.com or check our Patreon to listen to a bit more guided ways to keep your peace throughout the day, throughout the week. Appreciate all our current subscribers and people who are contributing to creating those resets. We have a few now different voices. If you don't like my voice or Mark, we'll have other people that you can listen to. Sami, maybe you can come and help us do some resets eventually. Any other thoughts, Mark and Sami, as we're coming to a close? And Randy, thanks again for your comment. If there's any other comments, we'll have a few more minutes to chat.
Yeah, one more question before we end the podcast today. So you were coming back to something you said before, that the governance piece is extremely important to talk about. And I don't think we actually circled back on that. And, maybe for a moment, just highlight for us and for the listeners why that is such an important piece when considering AI in healthcare implementation.
I mean, you can have the best algorithm or the best model, but when you deploy it, it's all the government, it's all the part that comes after the deployment. So if you don't have the system to support it, to monitor it, or the legal, ethical money to improve it, you will not be able to. That's why sometimes I talk about AI hype. I mean, I do believe, I don't remember this, if this number is truly objective or not, but I mean, a few weeks ago, I read that like 90% of the algorithms are not deployed. I mean, we can talk about hype there. I mean, if you have only 10% who are deployed in real life, that's a huge problem. That's a system problem. So that's the governance part. And even myself, I have worked on many models in my studies, in my research projects, on many models, and most of them, and even I know researchers and physician researchers, they pause, they say, okay, we have built that, we did that, but in real life, did you deploy it? No, that's why I'm talking about AI hype. You have many researchers who do research in AI in health, but very few models are deployed in real life. We need to be aware of that, and this is the government's responsibility to make sure that the model is deployable and everything that comes after deployment, all the structure, the system. The Health Canada is beginning a little bit slowly. FDA also, but there is a lot to do on that. It's much more important than we might have new algorithms next month and next year, but we need a much better governance. This is a very big issue, very big one. Besides the explainability and all the other stuff before the deployment, but the governance AI is very important. Yeah, I wrote an article on governance AI, Mark, if you want to read it. 2 days ago, it's on my LinkedIn. All the problem of governance and how we might improve it.
Yeah, I read some of your LinkedIn article. Thanks for kind of contributing in this discussion today and to the broader discussion of how AI and NLP can help healthcare in general, well-being. For the people in the audience who want to reach you, is LinkedIn the best way? How should people reach out to you?
Yeah, LinkedIn, or I have my email also, Gmail, samibahig@gmail.com, or my LinkedIn, Sami Bahig.
Thank you so much. Any last thoughts? I really appreciate the conversation with you both. We've learned a lot. We've learned about intrinsic and extrinsic cognition and work and AI and NLP for those who didn't know. Agentic AI we talked about. We talked about different mental illness and addiction and how it can be broadened, and how we can also create AI that might have a more ethical and balanced and objective empathy, which I'm really looking forward that maybe Sami and I will work together to create better compassion and empathy in the world using technology, Technology for good is always what we talk about. Really happy. So there is an AI hype, but there's not a hype from this episode. Like we delivered a good episode. That's one hype. Thank you all for listening. We will have our usual podcast next week on Friday noon. And we have another special podcast on Tuesday or Wednesday. Please check our channels. So we're going to talk about screen and youth globally, North America, EU, and even Asia, with special guest Sanjay Anand. That's March 11th. So I think that is Wednesday. So March 11th is our next one. And then we'll have one next Friday. Sami, talk more offline. Maybe we'll invite you in a few months as well to give us some more information on how you've built this better AI guidance and how maybe we'll collaborate to make the most empathic AI, which will not be a human. That's great news.
My pleasure to meet you. It was very interesting to share with you and to listen to you. If you want to invite me in a few months, it will be my pleasure to share new ideas or new insights. Yeah.
And in the meantime, we'll read you on LinkedIn. Mark, any closing thoughts? And thanks again for the audience for listening in.
Thank you so much, Sami. And thank you, everyone, for listening in again to another episode of the AWE Digital Wellness Podcast. We're so grateful for all of the listeners and viewers and looking forward to seeing everyone next time. Thank you again, Sami. And thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Mark. Have a great day. Thank you.
If you enjoyed with any of our channels,
thank you.
Please
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks again, Sami. If you
Thank you so
enjoyed
much.
any of our channel here, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, X, all those, LinkedIn, of course, please make sure to subscribe if you haven't and to share with some of our friends so we can continue to have great guests, great conversations as we grow the awareness and we grow our compassion and we can check our empathy sometimes and make sure that we're compassionate. Thanks again for the conversation, guys.
Pleasure.
It was amazing.
My pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week for more awe and awesome conversations. Make sure to follow us and comment on your thoughts on this week's topic. I'm your happiness expert and co-host, Christian Dominic. Please find and reach out to us directly and visit our website at awedigitalwellness.com. See you next time. Thanks for your curiosity. Looking forward to your comments, and keep on smiling.